Hey there folks, Mr. Finley here. This is a review video for the tools for Shakespeare that we've talked about in class. We've already derived all of these tools from our study of the monologues, but I wanted to put them together into one video to make it easy to review as you're doing your own explications for the Shakespeare competition project. The biggest tool, maybe, in Shakespeare is this idea of thesis and antithesis. As we said, thesis just means idea. Antithesis is literally what it sounds like, the antithesis, the balancing idea. So within any given line or sentence or speech, there are often pairs or multiple pairs of these balancing or opposite ideas. And it's really important to be able to seek them out and to make sure that they are really clear and the relationship between them is clear, because they're going to be the most important words in that line. And there's an example there that we've talked about in class, the Juliet description of Romeo as a fiend angelical, a dove-feathered raven, a wolvish ravening lamb, both opposites put together in one person. And as we talked about in class, this is not only a tool that's built into the language, but is even built into the characters and into their characterization. Good characters who do evil, evil characters who do good, and that's part of what makes Shakespeare so cool, as we discussed. The other really huge tool that we talked about is punctuation and the necessity of following punctuation. Punctuation, as we said, is the signpost of thought, and if you follow it, it will guide you through the rhythm of the speech, and when you have that rhythm, it will help you understand the characterization. So as a reminder, a period means a full stop, ends the idea. A comma doesn't end the idea, it's just a pause or breath that changes the direction. And a semicolon or a colon or a dash are used almost interchangeably to signal a larger pause, a larger change in direction, but not a full stop. Importantly, when you don't have punctuation at the end of a line, you don't pause there. Indeed, the energy should pick up and build into the next line. It should crescendo, to use the musical term. Or you can think of it as a ski jump. It builds, and there's no punctuation to stop it at the end of the line, so it flies into the next line. These four lines from a sonnet of Shakespeare's illustrate that. Notice the third line there. There's no punctuation at the end, and so the line just keeps on going, and it's talking about a lark, that's a bird, flying up from the earth toward heaven, and the language just flies through the line. So it sounds like the bird flying up to heaven because there's no punctuation getting in the way. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. Moving on from punctuation, we come to the idea that vowels contain emotion, and especially if you get a big open vowel like an O or an ah or a ha, it's used to signal that the character is moaning or crying or bursting out with emotion in some way. Shakespeare doesn't use stage directions to indicate that. He used these bare vowels, and if you've got a line with lots of vowels like oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown, you can use all of those vowels to convey that emotion. Similarly, if your emotion is building, Shakespeare will usually repeat a word or an image, and every time it's repeated, you give it greater and greater intensity, greater and greater emotion, often volume. Each time it's repeated, whether that's in a line or in a speech, it's repeated for a reason. It's because you didn't get the effect that you wanted to from saying it the first time, just like yelling at a younger brother or sister. So you say it again, howl, 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 oh, you are men of stones. It builds through each repetition. We've talked about the fact that apostrophes indicate a contraction. We do that the same exact way today, but Shakespeare will sometimes contract words that we don't usually contract in order to get 10 syllables to make the iambic pentameter, the speech's rhythm, work. So instead of pitch me in the mire, it becomes pitch me in the mire. That apostrophe means there's a missing syllable there. And it's important to figure out what that word actually is so you can pronounce it correctly and understand the meaning of the line. Similarly, when talking about dropping syllables, remember that words ending with ed generally pronounced with an extra syllable. So if it was spelled, you know, in that line S-U-C-K-E-D, it would be pronounced sucked. If you're going to drop that syllable, you replace it with an apostrophe, like any other dropped syllable. So in the line, we see that S-U-C-K apostrophe D, which is that sucked the honey of his music vows. Sounds much more natural. So again, if you see the apostrophe D, say it like we say it today. If you see it spelled out with a full ED, you're usually adding that extra ED ending, the extra syllable, for extra effect. Again, speaking of emotional effect coming out of words, Shakespeare will often use onomatopoeia, words which sound like what they are, to help illustrate the meaning or the emotional content of a line. So if he's talking about something nasty, the sound will be nasty. If he's talking about something beautiful, the words will sound beautiful, and you can use that to paint the picture of what you're talking about for the audience. So even if they don't understand the meaning of every word, they still get the emotional content from the sound. As in the line, an eye of ladies most deject and wretched. Those words sound nasty, the ideas are nasty. Typically, when Shakespeare wants to make a point, he will use a string of single-syllable words, just as you would if you were talking to, you know, a small child. You use small words, and just as you would when you're talking to a small child, you would slow down and make it really clear. So whenever there's a string of lots of single-syllable words, it's usually because Shakespeare is summing up an idea or trying to make a point, and that you should really slow down and hit those words. Like the very long line of single syllables that ends Ophelia's big speech. Oh, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen, see what I see. Of course, the thing you hear a lot about with Shakespeare is the rhythm of the lines, the ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. The fancy term for that is iambic pentameter, and it just means that every verse line has 10 syllables and they go in that sort of heartbeat pattern. And sometimes that rhythm is going to be varied up. There's an extra syllable or two, which indicates that it's a big emotional moment for the character. Their heart is literally skipping a beat, and so the beat of the line skips a beat too. And Shakespeare uses this pretty sparingly, but you'll see it show up, especially in his later plays, as a way of emphasizing the emotion in a line. He doesn't use it a lot, and the audience may not hear it, but they might pick it up subconsciously, that little change in rhythm. You can hear the difference in a regular line of 10 syllables, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks, not that anyone would say it, emphasizing it that way, as opposed to the irregular line with 11 syllables, to be or not to be, that is the question. There's an extra syllable there that sort of goes over. And again, Shakespeare doesn't use a ton of stage directions, so you do need to keep your eyes open for any implied stage directions, any action that is suggested by what the characters are saying. Like in Lear, when Lear says, the feather stirs, she lives, he's got to be holding a feather next to her mouth, just like discussed in class, otherwise the line makes no sense.